Thank you very much for joining us in this session. We have a very small group today, I have to say. We usually have a lot more people, but as Sonali was telling us, it's exam season at universities and students are invigilating and things like that. But we are recording this session and I'm sure there'll be lots of views on the VLE. Thank you so much for joining us, Chirantan. So and for the audience, so in this session we'll be looking at the use of Gen AI in quantitative research, and we're joined today by my esteemed colleague, Professor Chirantan Chatterjee. Is a professor of development economics, innovation, and global health here at Sussex, and is also one of the founding fellows at the Royal Economic Society. So I'll hand over to you, so you can start whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Anna. I just noticed that both screens had same names, so I just changed it. Okay, yeah. So I'm glad you guys could make it amid the exam season. I don't have too much to say except that I'm quite worried with what Gen AI is doing to our profession on all fronts. Some of these worries are good worries. Some of these worries are I don't know what will happen to our profession kind of worries. Um, but nonetheless, let me just tell you what my plan today is. So I wanted to share that. Let me see. So I want to talk about four things, folks, and hope you can see my screen. These are basically, have I used AI, where Gen AI, and how, and where I have ran into ahas and where I have become very cautious about how Gen AI could lead you into blind alleys and lots of dangers, because ultimately we are researchers and we have a responsibility to robustly and truthfully report evidence and those kind of conversations. So I would like to walk you through a couple of examples where I have been doing this stuff. And there's a fun anecdote also where Anna and me were having a chat in LinkedIn on using lazy regressions on AI to retain some sense of optimism about this morbid world that we are living in. But that's what I want to talk about in the first few minutes. Then I will jump into a paper by Anton Korinek. It's a long paper. It's a 80-page supplement and a 40-page main paper. I don't expect you guys to right away catch up with it in this particular session. But anybody interested in how Gen AI can be used by quantitative researchers, I will leave the paper with you guys and some general thoughts of what I'm noticing here in that paper, which may be informative and useful for you in how to embrace Gen AI in a smart and proper way. And then I would like to wrap up with couple of points on my worries, as I said, on writing, on the loss of potential judgment, the lure of using Gen AI without understanding where are the pitfalls, the speed with which papers potentially will be coming, the way frictions might arise on the journal reviewing and referring process, and what I am observing in terms of non-harmonized ways through which journals are embracing AI, which is a big worry because, and then we'll come to that in the on the non-harmonized standards, etc. When I come to that section. Lastly, I would like to highlight you to some like places in the Royal Economic Society where they are trying to have workshops and reformation in some sense of how to change the way economics teaching is evolving in the world of Gen AI and how researchers should be paying attention to Gen AI. It's just so all pervasive and encompassing that I don't think it's a smart idea to completely reject it. So far in the last 3-4 years, there have been no big adverse events. But that being said, we have to be also engaged in continuing education on how to embrace it. So that's something I want to talk about when I get into that last section and open up for some sort of a Q&A. Okay. So with that, let me tell you one example of a particular paper that I wrote with a student, and how exactly that somewhat formed a a lab for me. It was a laboratory and experiment for me to see how, where is it working, where is it not working. And this paper is as follows. I'm going to share the screen now. Uh, it is a paper with one of our colleagues in climate change, Benjamin Sovacool, and we have a Bennett Institute here, a PhD student. The idea is that there is a lot of anecdotal discussions where people are talking about the adverse effects of climate change, and especially on women, in the way they are struggling with it as vulnerable populations in the global south, but not too much of systematic, data driven, empirical work trying to explore what was happening. So the backstory of this paper is very important to note in the context of the Gen AI discussion. So I had been harping on finding a way to bring data together such that we can test for this basic hypothesis that there are gender distortions and sufferings which climate change through the mechanism of microfinance institutions are showing in the global south economies. And what kind of data set should be brought in here? We needed a PhD student to work with us on this story. Some things will work, some things will not work, etc. So I started, when this paper's idea was basically congealing in our minds, we started um, prompting ChatGPT and Meta AI essentially on my WhatsApp platform that, look, folks, we want to test for this. Here are some anecdotal evidences on this. These are the data sets that you should be going and assembling. And please run some initial, first, please create some hypothesis around it. And then show me whether there is some traction in the data uh, as to whether indeed temperature change is affecting the way uh, uh, women microfinance subscribers are not able to subscribe enough to microfinance, etc. And the prompt resulted in some obviously not so trustworthy outcomes, but uh, the LLM tried to give me some basic intuitions of this story, which got me more encouraged. And that's where I think the human computer interaction story portion of the story comes in, which is I brought, and I also checked, I used the prompts to somewhat test whether there is literature here that is actually quantitatively testing for this, and didn't look like there was one, though you have to apply your judgment with some skepticism that is it doing actually a proper systematic review or not, is it missing out journals, is it misnaming journals, and all those kind of things. And that's something at a broad level, when you're thinking about using Gen AI for research, you have to be always cognizant of that. You can't just be lazy about these Gen AI platforms saying that they are giving you the right things, the correct things, the robust things, and the responsibly reporting things. This is the biggest, I think, task for human beings when working and complementing with Gen AI platforms while using it for our research. So in this particular paper, getting some initial signals with some skepticism, I started working with Indrajit and getting the data together. And what we then found was something very similar to the initial regressions we got that showed that. So basically, what this paper does is it pulls in data for more than 100 countries over a large time period. And it then tests for certain countries, Brazil, South Africa, India, and China, when they went through 1 degree rise in temperature in these countries, what was happening to women subscribing to microfinance? Okay, that was the question we were going after. And what we found was similar to what the prompts were giving me, that when we actually did the models and ran the regressions, getting the data together, this is what we found. So a 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature is associated with an annual average decrease in overall number of microfinance institutions, MFIs, by about 24 on an average annually. But more importantly, active borrowers are decreasing, and active borrowers are decreasing more for women than for male borrowers. And then, of course, you had to apply your econometric judgment and your sense of signs, falsification, do placebos, are you controlling for this, are you controlling for that, all kinds of omitted variable conversations to see whether this baseline result holds true or not. But the point I'm trying to make here is that this was an idea which seemed like 1 year back untested, which is when I started prompting and playing with it. Then when Indrajit came in as and Anna knows Indrajit, when Indrajit came in, he went forward with the data assembling and the actual regression. So if you go down, you will see like the models are being run here. Um, So I'm sorry, some of you might not be knowing about regressions, but descriptively, what you can see is that Brazil, South Africa, India, and China, the number of MFIs went up. But after 2010, when the Copenhagen Accord explicitly legitimized the recognition that temperature change is a big concern, the number of MFIs are decreasing in these countries far faster than what is happening to the rest of the world, non-basic countries. The number of borrowers see some dips in a more abrupt way in the basic countries than in non-basic countries. And the number of female borrowers see similar shifts, but we don't see that story when we run models in male borrowers. So essentially using these results, Indrajit, myself, Benjamin then came up with this paper, and we took some help in literature reviewing, etc., to come up with something that's defensible. So obviously, as we were doing all this, we plugged in a first version of the draft into Google Notebook AI and said, hey guys, tell us where are we going wrong? Is there a generalizability problem? Do you want us to test for some sensitivity checks, etc., etc. Um, can you give me 1 second? Somebody is at the door. I'll just check. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so this is how I got a first taste of how I can use my thinking mind uh, to use Gen AI in a productive way. Now, there was another paper that we wrote, and I want to now jump into this particular study, but there was another paper where recently I've been working with a student from Ghana, where we are looking at what demonetization of bank currencies are doing to household economic inequality. There are data sets lying there to test for this. Um, you need a PhD student to do this testing. And then once the test is giving you some results, you have to like reconcile those results. First of all, make sure they're robust, and then reconcile those results on the ground with what is the real story going on. And I didn't know Africa. This was my first Africa project. So I was learning along with the student in the last 6 odd months on that particular project as well. What helped me here in the Gen AI story, I think, is a few things on different margins. So on the extensive margin, obviously, what the student was doing, I was constantly questioning with my Gen AI prompt, even sometimes giving him ideas with my thought experiments translated into AI prompts and then brought back to the student. Uh, but more explicitly, I think the speed of the project increased, and ideas for testing, robustness, sensitivity checks came through a bit more. You may not need, so in general, when you are doing this research as a PhD researcher and thereafter as a faculty, you sometimes need, you used to need in our old world when we got trained as a PhD student, we used to need early feedback. You needed brown bags, you needed workshops, conferences, etc. But it seems to me that there is a interesting kind of a way that the cost of getting early feedback is going to be diminished. People may not need to travel too much, and that could be one benefit of having Gen AI. Of course, this has unintended repercussions in the referring activities that are happening in journals, and we'll come to that later. But if you are located somewhere in, I don't know, pick up a place in Ghana or Kenya, and you have a paper, you want to test the paper, you want to get feedback on the paper. Today, you have the mechanism not to get accepted in a conference, go through the visa application process and travel somewhere, and all those shenanigans that come with attending workshops and conferences. But use this particular Gen AI platforms as your co-pilot in some sense to get early feedback. So that's another, those are the three takeaways I would say anecdotally to start with and tell you about my experience of using Gen AI in quantitative research. Summary is that you may have a thought experiment, but the thought experiment might only be there in your mind and you may not have the bandwidth to test it. Today we have Gen AI platforms to quickly run lazy models, especially as a quantitative researcher, even if you don't trust them, to see what's the nature of signal you're getting with your thought experiments. So for example, recently when there were a lot of clampdowns on the US side on I think there was the tariff wars that started. I was thinking, and people were writing about it. The Economist was writing about it. Financial Times was writing about it. This will harm all kinds of countries around the world. There will be job losses. There will be recession, this, that. But nobody was able to really tell me more what would be the nature of precise amount of recession that it's happening. What's the probability of that happening? What is the nature of job loss that one can be expected? So I asked Gen AI platforms to do that testing for me with 20-year data, telling them this is where you should go to World Bank to collect that data, go to somewhere else to collect some other data, bring them all together, run this kind of a model. Here is the dependent variable, here is the independent variable, you should control for these other things. And it did it, and it generated some results. Now obviously you have to constantly probe it smartly, and this is where our training process in the PhD programs I think will matter. The probing should become more and more intelligent such that you can grow with it in making the results more interesting and smart and reportable reliably. But that's what I think Gen AI is bringing to the table, where sometimes you were afraid to ask very brave questions because sitting somewhere you don't have access to a PhD researcher with you, a lab, resources, data, money. But Gen AI gives you some gamifying ability to test for your thought experiments. Okay, so that's one. Second, I think these students, my students, Stephen and Indrajit, they now know that they are graduating in this, like just like you, they're graduating in this world of Gen AI. Some others will be much far more sophisticated in the way they're using it. Some people will cheat, of course, but others will be sensitive about how to responsibly use Gen AI. And it's good to show them the pathway of how to sensitively and with responsibility uh, use your thought experimentation and data capabilities and peer reviewing, early peer reviews from these Gen AI platforms for your growth as a scholar going forward. So that's, I think, the big takeaway I'm taking away from these two experiments on these two papers. And the third thing I would say is, um, so this is something that I'm exploring now. So I recently had a very tough referee report from a top journal. And I'm just thinking, okay, this is the tough referee report. Here is my thought on it, how to respond to it. Some of it will require new data acquisition. Some of it will require new model running, and some of it might not be at all response. We may not be able to respond to it. So we'll have to take a risk in resubmitting it to the journal saying that, look, we tried a lot, we didn't get enough data. It doesn't look like a conceptually valid story to test for. Therefore, we have just done this, and we have acknowledged it as a limitation. Now, there is no intermediary between my thinking process and, let's say, the referee team and the editor to tell me whether that thought process is defensible or not when I submit this particular revision to the journal. And now I'm playing with the fact that can I engage with this Gen AI platform to say, hey, this is my response strategy for this referee report. What do you think? Am I missing out some ideas? And sometimes they surprise you, giving you a test here and a test there, do that check, do this check, which you as a human mind might be cognitively limited a bit. But having this co-pilot with you is helping you on that front as well. This all means that the speed of production and potentially the quality of production of papers will increase, with the caveat that there are certain locations in the world who are also using Gen AI platforms in a wicked kind of a way. So the responsibility for us as researchers, younger as well as elder researchers, is to keep an eye out on this potential malfeasance that one might engage in if one is doing research in this world of Gen AI. And it's nice that an Indrajit or a Stephen is now more and more aware of it. Okay, so that's my second or third point about using Gen AI in the context of quantitative research. There is one other thing that I wanted to highlight, which is this particular paper I was mentioning. So this guy, I'll send it to Anna, and she can circulate it with you guys. This is a this is really a tom. This came out earlier this year by a guy called Anton Korinek, who has basically torn apart how Gen AI can be used for economic research. Obviously, it's for economists, not for other social science researchers, but there are things here that is worth paying attention to for the broader population of social science researchers. So, for example, I will just try to quickly go through some of the key things that Anton is pointing at. Let me just make sure I'm on the. Sorry for this. 1 second. Just give me 1 second. It's coming. Um, yep. You can see my screen, right? The PDF again.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So there are a few interesting things here. So the first thing that he talked about in the paper is how are these LLMs helping quantitative researchers? Now, depending on what kind of work that you do, I don't do theory that much, economic theory that much, but there are theorists in the Department of Economics who would love to use Gen AI for mathematical derivation. So sometimes I have seen my own friends who do theory, like tearing their hair apart for months on end to get this like a proof done, because it's just not happening with the human mind. Something is going wrong somewhere, some parameter needs to be tinkered with, it's just not coming through in a mechanical kind of a way. But today with these LLMs, and down below in the many pages of this particular paper, there are examples of this, how you can use these platforms to quickly get mathematical solutions and derivations that the human mind might be slow to do quickly. Okay. The second thing is the idea of sophisticated coding tasks. Okay. This is super interesting. And this is especially interesting for people who are doing big data work with quantitative models like I do. And sometimes some of these models are sitting in some labs with some folks who are not completely visible and transparent in the way they make their models run. Okay, so I'll give you an example from my own job market paper during the PhD. I was using a model called Berry Levinson Pakes model at that time. This is 2010, 2011. And Stephen Berry is in Yale. And he came up with the first idea, the theory behind how this model should be run. And then some follow-on researchers, empirical researchers, quantitative guys took up that theory and coded up and tested it in some data to say, okay, this is working. And they started publishing papers on it. By the time I came around as an advanced PhD student in 2010-11, it was about 4 or 5 years stable in terms of recognition and legitimacy as a model. And nobody really knew which particular code is going to actually work on your data. So I basically, sitting in Pittsburgh where I was finishing my PhD, sending out random emails to everybody. A lady in MIT who just finished a PhD apparently had a code. Somebody in Cornell had a code. I wrote to somebody in Chicago saying I had a code. I got those codes and started seeing whether I can customize those codes and apply it to my data context. It took a lot of time. And even when it did take, I was able to do some customization. It did not work. There was no convergence happening, etc., etc. But today, I think with the Gen AI platforms, and of course, that BLP model has also evolved, and it is now a canned routine in Stata and all that. But definitely, coding is no longer as much of a differentiator for somebody who is good in coding versus somebody who's not so good in coding. I was like mediocre in coding, to be very honest about it. I was not like super excellent in coding. But there were people who were super excellent in coding who will probably lose some of the advantages that they had in the ecosystem, because in some sense it's democratizing the access to these quantitative codes that sometimes hampered people like us who were trying to struggle and get up to these codes. These are the two, I mean, maybe the three things. The Stephen Indrajit story is the empirical testing story, and then taking it to actual data and constantly hammering away on the robustness of the results and doing it fast, early peer review, etc. as a co-pilot. That's one. Second is, if you're doing theory, you have solutions today which you can quiz against, debate with, reprompt, etc., and see if you can kill those derivations, which should help the theorists in this space. And lastly, democratization of codes. But beyond that, I think both Anna and me know this, that there's a big emphasis, even as young researchers, as early career researchers, to take your findings to the ecosystem in terms for engagement. And now we know that Google Notebook LM and several other platforms are helping you to nicely summarize your results and make science relevant for the common man, right? So I think this is another benefit of having GenAI with us, which is, first of all, we didn't have the time to do all the distillation of complicated stuff that went into academic publications for the general populace, but we have a co-pilot now, which can help us do that through like a podcast, etc. It can even give us like draft blog posts that can come out of your studies, help you in creating slides if you want to take it to the classing in the classroom, etc., etc. A very funny example. I am supposed to do some workshop with folks with a Indian infrastructure company tomorrow actually. And what basically they are struggling with is how to adopt AI in that organization. So I have given them a small reading of how DeepSeek is diffusing in China. And now I'm thinking of doing a simulation with them, saying, folks, you are from the infrastructure industry. Here are the opportunities of where you can um, adopt AI. Here is the evidence in terms of the science behind it, what works, what doesn't work, what margins it works, etc. You are the chief technology officer or the chief HR officer, or you are the chief operations officer. Use these contexts to create a simulation game and let's run with it. It's all virtual, by the way. So I gave these prompts, everything that I told you now, I gave these input files and these prompts to Google Notebook LM, and it came out with a simulation game. I was like amazed in like 5 minutes. And then, of course, I tinkered with it, made it a little more relevant. And now I feel a little empowered that I have something which is very real time to tell them of the challenges organizationally to adopt AI in an infra company, which is located in the global south. To be honest, if you look at my research, it's more about health and pharma. I was a little afraid that can I take my institutional and organizational understanding in health and pharma to infra company, but with the help of these guys and with the help of input files and input prompts, I'm able to now somewhat respectably show my value in this particular workshop as a professor doing this simulation. It can also, of course, help you in interview preparation. So one of my students told me recently that she was preparing for an Amazon interview. And Amazon, if you know, it has a very notorious process of interviewing candidates, like many rounds, many groups, all kinds of puzzles. And then nobody knows exactly how they are collecting the performance of each of these rounds and groups and then coming up with an answer. So basically, you can prompt today these Gen AI platforms to say, hey, I'm going to do an Amazon interview for this particular position. Can you help me through the rounds? And they will work with you as a co-pilot to prepare for such interviews. So there are all kinds of very interesting things happening in the quantitative research space with Gen AI that Korenik is telling us. There are then several observations that Korinek obviously is documenting that we are aware of anecdotally. So he's talking about the field moving very fast. He's talking about which particular model looks to be the best. OpenAI seems to be the clear leader in this space. So there's a nice table here with data as of November 2024, and one has to constantly update it, which tells you how are these Gen AI platforms performing on their what is called the LIMSIS score. The LIMSIS score is basically like the chess elo rating, which gives you a sense of how good this AI is on a test. And it looks like OpenAI is doing the best. The Chinese platforms like Alibaba, DeepSeek is not here, but one potentially is already testing for this. But this is how they are ranked out. There is some heterogeneity in the way they are performing. The amount of tokens, the amount of these syllables that you can plug in also are varying. You can have a sense of the training data cutoff that they're using and where they're going to be accessible. So there's some heterogeneity here. There are some frugal models, obviously coming from China, that are also being used. In fact, there are a couple of Indian frugal models that has been launched this week, but they have performed miserably. And people are like trying to say, well, this is actually good because now we know, we learn, we do better, da da da. All those kind of conversations are coming out from the global south as well in the speed of progress that's coming in how it can help research. Another interesting development from this week is, I mean, we know this from Scientiometrics that a lot of publications are obviously coming out from China, but also from Saudi Arabia. And this week, there was I think, agreement signed by OpenAI and the Saudi Arabian government that they will make OpenAI completely free for their entire population. In addition to the fact that they have also now made it compulsory for young children. Obviously, the implications of that in our critical thinking ability tomorrow is something that we'll have to wait and watch for. But imagine a world where certain countries have been able to strike deals with free access to OpenAI and constantly using it and making it like second nature in their living, thinking, ideating, taking their country forward. And other countries are still not doing it. Or doing it in a more cautious kind of a way. There would be some sort of a horse race that would be introduced in the way the research production function will be changing as well. The professors and the researchers who are sitting in Saudi in some locations, like Abu Dhabi also has a big AI university these days. They will, I think, race like these very prompt horses out of the block. And some of us who are in other locations which are more cautious, might be actually thinking, is that the right way to go? Would it give you reliable signs? And what are the implications of that for us? Do we find a way to standardize that story? Do we find a way to capture and control malfeasance if there is that in that story, etc., etc.? So these are things that are happening in the Gen AI broader cross-country context world that is interesting to keep an eye on. There are some details on these models, OpenAI model that Korinek is talking about versus Gemini versus Grok versus Claude. And I have been using a little bit of mostly OpenAI and Meta AI, not too much of Anthropic apparently, and Claude apparently is more science friendly, scientist friendly. These are things that you, I think, have to dirty your hands yourself and with the same question and get some, and maybe read this paper as well to get some sense of who is where. The things are also very dynamic. If Claude is very good today, it's not necessary that it will remain so in a year's time. That's something to keep in mind. Let me go down and highlight something else I wanted to show to you guys. Give me 1 second. Yeah. So there was some competition, and some of you might have seen it on social media posts. So this is OpenAI data. They were benchmarking GPT-4o with O1, O1 in competitive maths, competitive coding, and PhD level science questions. And some of these platforms are doing better. And this was also benchmarked for science with human experts. It looks like, at least for two of these models, the catch up is quite dramatic. And this will change the way we think about research, how we fund research, how we ponder the story of PGR research and early career research in the universities, etc. For sure. I mean, not if not now, for sure in the next 10 years, things are changing dramatically fast. Look at the right-hand picture, for example, where the human expert benchmarking for accuracy is at 69%, whereas the O1 stories are much more than 75%. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Here is an example of how mathematical derivations are getting so much more easier. This is an easy example. It's a use case where somebody asked a complicated maths expression and asked it to log linearize it and tinker with it, and these guys are doing it. I mean, obviously my maths is very rusty these days, but even a PhD researcher will take some time to do it, but it gets done in a jiffy these days with these platforms. And of course, your job is to then constantly nudge and probe these solutions and see if it holds. Are there any mistakes? Can it be credibly reported in your writings, in your science, etc., etc. So that's something I wanted to highlight. Let me go down. This is an example of how Python code is changing the Ramsey growth model, some complicated macro model, but it gives you the code. Unlike the world where I was struggling with all these emails to unknown strangers in different universities to get my BLP code, today you get codes like this, even for codes which are potentially not available publicly. The LLM platforms has the ability to go somewhere to potentially websites of people if you prompt them appropriately and get those codes and come up with some baseline version of the code, etc. Okay, and you will see downstairs, I mean, in this particular paper, that there is a uh, some new ability to draw graphs and pictures also in some of these platforms. So this particular table basically tells you about how comprehensive particular LLM workspace is. And you will see that in some cases like OpenAI, it's very focused on coding, data uploading, visualization, coding, error correction. In other cases, there are other things that are more fancy, like in Anthropic, Claude, etc. But there does seem to be a technological race here between these LLM platforms in the efficient science that they may be able to offer to us as researchers going forward, and that's something to keep an eye on. So it will, I think my sense is, it will depend on your context. So if you are exploring a question in Ghana or in India, and you want to comparably benchmark their ability to give you some initial signals of stuff or generate some graphs or generate some codes, you'll have to the human intervention here would be by benchmarking across these platforms, where is the best efficient and most reliable evidence coming out, and can you also triangulate the evidence with your own human intervention. So this might mean like a foolish thing to do, especially if, let's say, Saudi based researchers are quickly able to create a papers without pondering about triangulation and sensitivity checks and reliability of results. But in the long run, I think a slowish approach, a cautious approach where human triangulation is happening to platforms, giving you some outcomes, is the right way to go, is the safest way to go, etc., etc. I mean, you would also probably, as PGR researcher, be paying attention to the replicability crisis in science, right? So this week, Francesca Gino in Harvard was denied. I mean, her tenure was revoked. This is the first time since the 1940s a tenured superstar faculty's tenure has been revoked by Harvard and perhaps anywhere in the US. The reason is there are issues with the science that she has been producing recently. She's a behavioral economist, broadly speaking, experimental person. And of course, she will now legally fight it. She has been fighting it for the last 2, 3, 4 years. But the point is, do you really want to run into this kind of a situation by not triangulating, by being less than cautious and producing papers that don't pass the sniff test? Now, the question is, you can ask, who is doing the sniff? Are these dogs who are doing the sniffing job adequately trained? And that's where I think senior researchers like us have a responsibility to be very, very cautious about catching stuff. So downstairs in this paper, you will see about how you can actually catch AI detection, I mean AI detection in writing, in theorization, etc., etc. That's there. Um, let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to share. This is best. This particular paper is best read separately offline, and then thought about how to use it in your context, whatever your research is going to be. It's a little econ and a quant oriented. I'm sure for those working on qualitative research, thinking about coding, different methodologies, there must be publications coming out how to use it. But it's worth paying attention to this stuff. That Korinek, and it's very fresh. It's like December to May, last 6 months of what's happening, what's the latest in this space for quantitative researchers. So that's that. My summary point here is, let me just go to page 32. There's a table there. Sorry for scrolling down like this. Uh, Yeah, this table. So broadly speaking, and he has updated this 2 years back when this working paper was out. This was not like this, but you can see here that if you divide the nature of research into ideation and feedback, doing the writing, there's, I think, a section where data analysis should come before writing, some understanding of what is the prior work so that you can actually very comprehensively contribute to the literature or not contribute to the literature. It's good to have that sniff test first. So the background research part, then the coding part, and then the maths part. And it's showing already that it's helping very much in writing, various parts of writing. It's helping very much in data analysis. Um, Not so much, I think, in the maths yet, uh, especially if it's like proving stuff. It obviously is helping in research promotion, and a little less in ideation and feedback. Here, human back and forth with your supervisors and between your collaborators, etc., still seems to be retaining some advantage, though the speed with which things are changing in my project experience with Indrajit and Stephen, my Ghanaian student, is that this might actually be very different in a span of 12 months or something. Um, so that's that. I want to then now go back to my worries. My broader worry is what would happen as researchers if you're doing this to trust in science? Will people become more uh, upset that science is not reliable, especially given all the things that are happening with populism around the world? This is like a negative double whammy or a triple whammy that science is going to go through, because certain locations in the world will get free access to OpenAI, produce so many more papers in a month, and not care too much about their reliability. Journals are struggling with AI referee reports, and there are no harmonizations of standards. So, will we then not just have the replicability crisis that I talked about, but also trust in science? And what is the form and shape of science tomorrow with AI as a result is something that I want to leave. I don't have an answer to that, but I am thinking about what will happen to science generally. I know that one of my colleague was in Oxford, I think a couple of weeks back, for giving a keynote on all the top Elsevier journals. And he was telling me that all the Elsevier editors are super worried what AI is doing to the journal peer review process. In fact, it might even abolish the journal peer reviewing process the way things are going. Something else might come up which is different, which is tested through other mechanisms, and that's the way science might evolve. There's a guy called Karthik Hosanagar in Wharton in Pennsylvania. He's talking about explicitly embracing AI referees to speeden up rejection process in journals. So he's saying, let's not even go to human referees in information systems research journals. Let's use at the first level AI referee, and use that to desk reject, accept, da da da. And then you bring in human interventions as required for a more filtered kind of publications. I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but I think some journals are trying to pilot that story and see if it results in intended and unintended consequences. Of course, journals also have their problems, even with the world before AI, which is they took a long time, there were clicks, there were resource constraints, there were biases towards which they were tilting towards. Potentially, AI could actually democratize and eradicate some of those frictions that the journal reviewing system was struggling with, but then it can also take it the other direction. So we have to keep a watch out on that, which is my main worry essentially. But generally, I'm quite excited. As Anna knows, I'm trying to use AI in a positive way, in an optimistic way. I do feel that my role increasingly is becoming the role of like the Supreme Court judge sitting on the bench and catching where are the errors? Are this reliably tested? Where did you do it? Is this written up through a Gen AI platform? Have you triangulated with a human check? Etc. etc. It was always there like that, but even more so today, the responsibility for judgment and applying human cognition and credibility of science is increasing for people like us who are at a later stage in our career. So that's all. Let's open up, Anna, if that's okay, for some
Yeah,
Q&A.
absolutely. Thank you. So any questions from the audience? I do have one, but maybe I'll ask while we let the rest type. So thank you for that overview. So you essentially talked about how, in my view, how Gen AI, LLMs, for instance, but Gen AI could help across all stages of this quantitative research, from stress testing some early ideas to then even summarizing and communicating research. And I wanted to get, because we always tell students that they need to be very aware of stakeholders' perceptions. We talked about, so for instance, examiners, reviewers, journal editors. So from your experience, are you finding any pushback? So yes, we telling students to use this, and then is there a problem that they will submit to a journal and the journal will push back because there's,
Yeah,
are you finding that?
yeah, I am. So there's a recent paper which I was which went to one journal. It came back clearly with a AI referee. It was with a student
Mm,
referee report. We reported that to the editor. With data on 60%, 70% AI detector reporting of AI referee report. But the editor is not accepting our point. And therefore we had to pull ourselves out and go to another journal, which interestingly has gone to the same referee who has again generated the same referee report
mm,
and given us the same. So this is a bizarre world where we are living in, where people are thanklessly referring. There's no incentive to do the referring service. They're now lazily using these AI interventions to do this stuff. And the PhD student with me basically is going to like ponder what's going on. I mean, how can you trust the science if this is the way journals are handling AI interventions? So that's a big pushback that's happening. The
mm,
second pushback I am thinking is going to come soon with both these two students is the writing part. Especially these guys have a temptation to adopt, if they're not native English language speakers, they will have a temptation to take the help of a co-pilot in their language skills and in their framing, exposition, etc. Sometimes there will be false positives. They may not have taken this, but they will be falsely attributed to have taken help from AI, and there will be it will be very difficult. I've seen some debates on social media where it has been difficult to prove that you haven't taken help of AI, but people just generally label you as having taken help of AI. The third thing is to be very transparent about it. So, social science and medicine, some weeks back, months back, send me a paper to review. I think it came from somewhere in China because it was a Chinese paper and it could feel like it was unusually good language from the usual Chinese papers I mean, with all due respect to their language skills. And they were very open and transparent about they having used Perplexity, I think,
mm,
to writing. But I was like, okay, then what exactly have you guys done? You have an idea. You are telling me you have done some data work and you have written it up using Perplexity, and the journal is allowing you to get in despite that because you have disclosed transparently
mm,
uh, to get reviewed. It was an interesting question. but I was very skeptical from the start seeing that. And journals are very heterogeneous today um, in applying these standards, which is my big concern. And I don't know how to. I mean, different journal publishing houses will take different stances here, which is also, I think, somebody somewhere is going to disrupt this and say, hey, I am not going to go the Elsevier way, or I'm not going to go the Willy way, or whoever the publishing houses are way. I will do a different way through which I will use AI for research purposes. Just like Khan Academy is doing to primary education, saying that I don't need to like think about how the traditional primary schools are doing with AI or not doing with AI. I can do my own things. And to the extent I can learn by university collaborations, it's doing a big collaboration with CMU these days. Uh, that's how I'm going to disrupt using AI the way primary education is distributed around the world. This probably is going to come in the journal space as well, because there are existing frictions and troubles. Over and above that, there are these very ad hoc ways different groups of researchers in different locations are using AI, and then there are false positive possibilities. Sooner rather than later, we'll see the implications of all that in terms of either they harmonizing or they're seeing some alternative disruption happening to the way peer-reviewed research is happening in this story. So I think that these are some things where I'm facing pushback. Uh, it's so pervasive that and it's so attractive also, to be honest. There are certain things they do so fast and so smartly, sometimes surprising you, that it's difficult to say stay away from them as a vice good or something. There are some virtues, as I mentioned earlier, but at the same time, I think as senior researchers, we should have dedicated modules in PhD training programs. We do like semester long training of the goods and bads of Gen AI. Where are we? Where is the direction of travel in terms of harmonizations? What should be you be aware of in terms of your responsibility towards science, replicability and reproducibility issues, etc., etc. I think that's the only way forward through which we can generate consciousness that is going to be normatively welfare enhancing for our scientific production ecosystem.
Chirantan, we have a question here in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Related question, which I'll read it to you. So, what is your experience in relation to PhD examiners and how they are viewing the use of AI by PhD students at different stages of the research process?
The little I have, I mean, we still have human AI examiners, and we still have human annual review panels. So far, I mean, we just finished a bunch of annual review panels here in Sussex last couple of weeks. I saw people still spending time reading what was given to them in the panels and giving good feedback, critically thinking. But these are all like jobs done by these annual review panels and the external examiners, mostly out of gratis. Like there's not too much payment here, sometimes no payment, right? So there is definitely a temptation, I would say, for the human being doing the AR panel or the external examination to say, hey, if I'm doing this, I'm not getting paid much, paid nothing. I'll just use the AI prompt to get some questions and throw it at the student concerned. Sometimes they would be legitimate questions, which is where human judgment comes in and enhances. But other times it might be just like a very distanced kind of an engagement that examiners are going to have with students, which is a real worry to me, Jonathan, because ultimately I think the entire PhD process is a lot about conversations with your supervisor and the doctoral student. And if it becomes a story of
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, you know what I'm saying. So it will be a real pity. Something has to be done about it, etc., etc.
But I think the question, the way I understood it, is whether examiners are kind of, if they believe a student used AI, whether they kind of are engaging with it or rejecting it. I think that was the question about how they perceive.
Yeah, I don't think it depends. It depends on the examiner. If somebody is very old world, they may even be very grumpy and reject it. In general, people are accepting it, but they're keeping an eye out on detecting where AI has been used, has it been disclosed, has it been suitably vetted by the supervisors before coming to the examiners, and if there are still residual errors, then that's basically sloppy, lazy work, and they will catch you on that as an examiner, if they can, if they have the time to do that. So I think the number of old world people are lesser these days. People are more or less uh, embracing this. Uh, but there is a little bit of healthy skepticism, I would say, at least on the UK side. That's my sense. I don't know what's going on in other jurisdictions, but definitely on the UK side, examiners are still very cautious about, while embracing AI, letting that slip through in some sense, if that answers you, Jonathan.
Yes, Jonathan, if I may add just something here, because of a discussion I had last week, I think the approach we are adopting is that you should document why you
Yes.
decided to use it and how you used it and have some sort of risk assessment. So you should document this so that if the examiners ask, why did you use it? Say, well, these were the pros and the cons for the time being, because we are in this transition stage, isn't it? So I think.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to Anna's point here, there is some new development happening in the AI world, where insurance policies are coming in to take care of adverse events in with chatbots, for example. So maybe that's another direction of travel, where publishers will have some sort of insurance policy if papers results are not trustworthy, there's a reproducibility crisis, etc. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah.
I had another quick question. So you mentioned this list. Thank you for sharing this paper with some examples of tools. But which tools are you specifically using? So you mentioned Notebook LM, right?
I use Notebook LM for engagement.
Yeah.
And the Claude seems to be very helpful for those on the theory side.
Mhm.
Uh, and I have done lazy stuff on Meta AI, but that's just it. I know that some of the students are subscribing to OpenAI, paying $20 a month. Even some of our own PGR students, by the way, Anna, and
Yeah,
they're using it for all kinds of purposes. Yeah.
yeah, that's the
20
other
pounds a
challenge,
month.
isn't it? Like for instance, from an institutional perspective, we're told we can only use Copilot, but then of course you have students that if they use OpenAI or something, they may have access to other features that are much
Exactly.
more
Exactly.
advanced. Great. I think this has been really helpful. We do typically run for an hour, so participants may have to go elsewhere. If there are no other questions, thank you so much again, Chirantan, for joining us today. So
My pleasure.
this recording will be shared on our YouTube channel later. And then Jenny will let you know later about the sessions. We're organizing one on qualitative research and then on visual research as well.
And I will share the paper for circulation.
Yes, please, that would be great. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Have a
you,
lovely
everyone.
weekend and
Bye
see you
bye.
soon.